The Beatles' reunion was a total disaster, until one improvised note changed everything. London, 1970. The city that had once pulsed with the vibrant energy of Beatlemania now held a different kind of silence, a heavy, mournful quiet where the echoes of a broken dream still lingered. The Beatles were no more, officially, but the world refused to let go. The whispers of a reunion, a miraculous coming together of the Fab Four, were a constant, nagging presence. A desperate hope clung to buy millions. And in the heart of London, in a sterile, unfamiliar recording studio, that hope was about to be tested. It was a cold, gray November afternoon, the air thick with unspoken history, with years of resentment, of fractured friendships. John Lennon walked into the studio, his face a mask of weary defiance. He saw Paul McCartney, already there, meticulously tuning his bass, a familiar gesture that now felt alien, almost confrontational. George Harrison, ever the quiet observer, sat hunched over his guitar, wall of unspoken grievances between him and the others. And Ringo Starr, the steady beat, the gentle soul, looked like a man caught in the crossfire of a war he never wanted to fight. This wasn't Abbey Road. This wasn't their sanctuary. This was a neutral territory, chosen by lawyers and managers, a place devoid of their shared ghosts, yet haunted by the very absence of them. The reason for this impossible gathering, a contractual obligation, a final bitter taste of the business machine that had ultimately consumed them, a few unreleased tracks, a compilation, a final cynical attempt to squeeze blood from a stone, but the unspoken agenda was far more profound. Could they, after all the accusations, the public feuds, the deeply personal betrayals, find their way back to the magic? Could the four men who had changed the world with their harmony find harmony again? John looked at Paul, and for a fleeting moment he saw not the rival, not the antagonist, but the boy from Liverpool, the boy with whom he had written songs that moved mountains. But the moment passed, replaced by the cold reality of the present. The studio engineer, a nervous young man, cleared his throat. "Right then, gentlemen. Shall we begin?" Begin what? A final, painful dissection of their past, a forced performance for the sake of a contract, or perhaps, just perhaps, a miracle. The first track they attempted was an old, unfinished demo, a song from their early days, full of youthful exuberance, now sounding hollow, almost mocking in the strained silence of the room. John picked up his guitar, his fingers stiff, his heart heavy. Paul started the bass line, precise but devoid of soul. George played a tentative riff, his eyes fixed on the floor. Ringo tapped out a beat, a rhythm that felt more like a death knell than a heartbeat. It was a disaster, a total, unmitigated disaster. The music was flat, lifeless, a pale imitation of the vibrant sound they had once effortlessly created. The ghost of the Beatles was in the room, yes, but it was a ghost of what they had been, not what they could be. And John, looking at the faces of his former bandmates, felt a familiar despair creeping in. This wasn't a reunion. It was a funeral, a final, painful confirmation that the magic was truly gone. But sometimes, in the darkest moments when all hope seems lost, a single, unexpected note can change everything. A note improvised, unplanned. A note that cuts through the noise of the past and reminds everyone of the truth they had forgotten, the truth of who they really were, and what they were truly capable of. The first few hours in that London studio were a testament to the chasm that had opened between them. Each attempt at playing together felt like pulling teeth. The music, once a fluid conversation, was now a series of disjointed statements, each vying for dominance, none truly connecting. John, usually the instigator, the one to break the tension with a sarcastic remark, was unusually quiet. He watched Paul, who, in turn, avoided his gaze. The years of public feuds, the bitter accusations hurled through the press, hung heavy in the air. "Can we just try that again?" Paul asked, his voice strained after a particularly disastrous take of an old, forgotten B-side. "Ringo, your timing was a bit off." Ringo, ever sensitive, bristled. "My timing? John's guitar was out of tune, and George sounds like he's playing in another room. George merely sighed, adjusting his glasses. Maybe we just shouldn't be doing this. The words, spoken softly, resonated with a truth they all felt but dared not voice. This wasn't working. It was worse than not working. It was painful. It was destroying the last vestiges of their shared memory. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John finally spoke, his voice low, cutting through the rising tension. He's right, this is a joke. We sound like a pub band trying to cover the Beatles. Paul slammed his hand on his bass. Then why are we here, John? Why did you even agree to this? Contractual obligation, Paul, John retorted, his eyes flashing. You know that, just like you know this is pointless. The engineer, sensing an imminent explosion, nervously suggested a break. The four men retreated to separate corners of the studio, the silence now even heavier, filled with the weight of their unspoken resentments. John lit a cigarette, watching the smoke curl upwards, a metaphor for their fading dreams. He thought of the early days in Liverpool, the cramped clubs, the shared dreams, the raw, unbridled energy that had propelled them forward. Where had that gone? Replaced by ego, by money, by the relentless pressure of being legends. He saw Paul pacing, running his hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. He saw George, lost in his own world, plucking a melancholic tune on his guitar, a melody that sounded like a lament. And Ringo, sitting quietly behind his drum kit, looking utterly defeated. This wasn't a reunion. It was a painful reminder of everything they had lost. The magic was gone. The camaraderie was shattered. The band that had once been an extension of each other's souls was now just four individuals, forced together by legalities, unable to even make decent music. John felt a profound sadness, a sense of irreversible loss. He had walked away from the Beatles, believing it was necessary for his own artistic freedom. But seeing them now, struggling to even play a simple chord progression, made him question everything. Was this the price of freedom? The complete annihilation of something so beautiful, so powerful? He closed his eyes, trying to conjure the ghost of their former glory. The harmonies, the effortless interplay, the way their voices and instruments had woven together to create something transcendent. But all he heard was the discordant echoes of their present. The engineer returned, his face etched with concern. "Gentlemen, we really need to get something down. We're running out of time." John opened his eyes, a flicker of defiance returning. "Fine," he said, stubbing out his cigarette. "Let's try one more, but this time let's try something different." He looked at Paul, a challenge in his eyes. "Let's try Strawberry Fields Forever." The choice was audacious. Strawberry Fields Forever, a masterpiece of psychedelic artistry, a song that had pushed the boundaries of what pop music could be. A song that had been born from John's own complex, introspective mind. It was a risk, a huge risk, because if they couldn't even play a simple rock and roll tune, how could they possibly tackle something so intricate, so deeply personal? But John knew, if there was any hope of finding the magic again, it wouldn't be in rehashing old, forgotten demos. It would be in confronting the very essence of their artistic souls. And in that moment, as he picked up his guitar, a faint, almost imperceptible shift occurred in the room. A tiny spark of curiosity, a whisper of possibility, a challenge that for a brief moment transcended their personal animosities. Strawberry Fields Forever. The title hung in the air, a ghost of their psychedelic past. Paul looked at John, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. This wasn't a simple choice. This was a gauntlet thrown. "You really think we can pull that off?" Paul asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "It's complex." "We used to be complex, Paul," John retorted, a wry smile playing on his lips. "Or have you forgotten?" George, for the first time that day, looked up, a spark of interest in his usually weary eyes. Ringo, ever the loyal one, simply picked up his sticks, ready for whatever John threw at them. John began to play the opening chords on his acoustic guitar, tentative at first, then, with growing confidence. The melody, haunting and ethereal, filled the sterile studio. Paul joined in on bass, his fingers finding the familiar, intricate lines. George added a delicate, almost mournful slide guitar, weaving through John's melody. And Ringo, with a subtle, understated beat, provided the heartbeat. But something was still missing. The magic, the effortless synergy that had once defined their sound. They played through the first verse, each note technically correct but emotionally hollow. John's voice, usually imbued with such raw emotion, sounded distant, almost detached. "Nothing is real," he sang, and in that moment it felt like nothing was. As they reached the instrumental break, the tension in the room was palpable. This was where the song usually soared, where their individual talents converged into something greater. But today it felt like it was about to fall apart. John looked at Paul, a silent plea in his eyes. Paul looked back, his own frustration warring with a deep-seated yearning for their past. Then it happened. Unplanned, unrehearsed. An improvised note. As John finished the line, "Living is easy with eyes closed," Paul, instead of playing the expected bass note, hit a high, resonant chord. A chord that wasn't in the original arrangement. A chord that was unexpected. A chord that was, in its own way, a question, a challenge, a desperate attempt to connect. The note hung in the air, shimmering, unexpected, and in that single improvised sound something shifted. John's head snapped up. His eyes met Paul's, and for the first time that day, he saw not the rival but the collaborator, the partner, the other half of his musical soul. Paul's improvised note was a bridge. A moment of pure, unadulterated musical intuition that cut through the years of silence, the layers of resentment, the weight of their broken friendship. It was a reminder of what they had once been, of what they could still be. George, hearing the unexpected chord, instinctively altered his own guitar line, creating a countermelody that intertwined with Paul's note. Ringo, feeling the shift in energy, subtly changed his rhythm, adding a new layer of complexity, a new pulse to the song. And John felt it, the spark, the connection, the sudden, undeniable rush of creative energy that had once defined their every moment together. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his voice was different. It was imbued with the raw emotion, the vulnerability, the profound longing that had made Strawberry Fields Forever a masterpiece. "Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields." The words, once sung with detachment, now carried the weight of their shared history, their lost innocence, their desperate hope for redemption. They played through the rest of the song, and with each note, the magic slowly, tentatively, began to return. The music flowed. The harmonies blended. The individual instruments wove together into a tapestry of sound that was unmistakably the Beatles. When the final note faded, there was silence. But this time, it was a different kind of silence. Not the heavy, resentful quiet of before, but a silence filled with awe, with wonder, with the profound realization that something extraordinary had just happened. The engineer, who had been sitting with his head in his hands, looked up, his eyes wide. "Bloody hell," he whispered. That was the Beatles." John looked at Paul, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Paul returned the smile, a hint of tears in his eyes. The improvised note, the unspoken chord. It had broken the spell of their animosity. It had reminded them of the truth they had forgotten, that their music was bigger than their egos, bigger than their arguments, bigger than any individual. It was a force of nature. And for a brief, miraculous moment, the Beatles were back. But the journey was far from over. And what happened next would determine if this fleeting moment of magic could truly heal the wounds of the past. The improvised note, Paul's unexpected chord, had cracked open the dam. The flood of raw emotion, of shared history, of undeniable musical connection began to pour through. After the silence, after the engineer's stunned declaration, John spoke, his voice softer than it had been all day. "Paul," he said, "that note, where did that come from?" Paul shrugged, a slight flush on his cheeks. "I don't know, John. It just felt right, like it was supposed to be there." "It was," George said quietly, looking up from his guitar. "It changed everything." Ringo nodded, a genuine smile finally gracing his face. It was like we were playing together again, properly. The tension hadn't vanished entirely, but it had transformed. The air was no longer thick with resentment, but with a fragile sense of wonder. They had touched something real, something profound. "Let's try it again," John said, a new energy in his voice. "From the top." And Paul hit that note again. They played Strawberry Fields Forever a second time, and this time it was even better. The harmonies were tighter. The interplay between their instruments was fluid, intuitive. John's vocals soared, imbued with a newfound passion. Paul's bass line was both grounding and exploratory, dancing around John's melody. George's guitar work was exquisite, adding layers of texture and emotion. And Ringo's drumming was the steady, unwavering pulse that held it all together. When the song ended, the applause came not from an audience, but from the engineer end. The few crew members in the room. Genuine, heartfelt applause. "Bloody brilliant, lads," the engineer exclaimed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Absolutely brilliant." John looked at his bandmates, and for the first time in years he felt a flicker of hope. "You know," he said, a hint of his old mischievous grin returning, "we're not so bad when we actually try." Paul laughed, a genuine, unforced laugh. "Took you long enough to admit it, Lennon." The ice had broken. The conversation, once stilted and hostile, began to flow. They talked about the song, about the nuances of the arrangement, about the feeling they had recaptured. But beneath the musical discussion, something deeper was happening. They were talking to each other again, as people, not just as bandmates, not just as rivals. "Remember when we wrote this?" John asked, looking at Paul. "In Spain, I think, or was it India?" "Spain," Paul confirmed. "You were holed up in your room, writing lyrics, and I was trying to come up with a melody that matched the mood." "And you did," John admitted, a rare compliment. "You always did," George chimed in. "I remember thinking it was the weirdest thing we'd ever done. But also the best," Ringo added. "I just tried to keep up. You two were always pushing the boundaries." The memories, once painful, now felt like a balm. A reminder of the shared journey, the unparalleled creative partnership that had defined their youth. They spent the rest of the afternoon working on other unfinished tracks, but the atmosphere had completely changed. The music flowed more easily. The arguments were replaced by collaborative suggestions. The laughter, once absent, now filled the studio. They even started improvising, jamming on old rock and roll standards, just like they used to do in the early days. John and Paul, facing each other, guitars in hand, trading licks, their voices blending in effortless harmony. It wasn't a full reunion, not yet. The wounds were still too deep, the past too complex to simply erase. But the cracks were beginning to mend. The music, their shared language, was doing what no amount of talking or therapy could. It was healing them. As the day drew to a close, John felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at Paul, who was packing up his bass, and a silent understanding passed between them. They hadn't solved all their problems. They hadn't erased the pain of the past, but they had found something, a flicker of the magic, a reminder of the undeniable bond that had once made them unstoppable. And John knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that this wasn't just about a contractual obligation anymore. This was about something far more profound. This was about the possibility of redemption, the possibility of finding their way back to each other, not just as musicians, but as friends. The journey was still uncertain, the path ahead fraught with challenges. But for the first time in a long time, John Lennon felt a glimmer of hope. A hope born from one improvised note. A hope that perhaps, just perhaps, The greatest band in the world still had a song left to sing. The following days in the studio were a delicate dance, a tentative exploration of renewed connection, constantly threatened by the ghosts of their past. They continued to work on the compilation tracks, but the focus had shifted. It wasn't just about finishing the album anymore. It was about finding their way back to each other. John and Paul, once inseparable, then bitter rivals, now found themselves falling into old patterns. Sitting side by side, guitars in hand, working through melodies, bouncing ideas off each other. The arguments still flared, but they were different now. Less personal, more creative. "No, Paul, that chord change is too saccharine," John would grumble. "Saccharine? It's melodic, John. Not everything has to sound like a primal scream," Paul would retort. But then a laugh, a shared glance, a compromise. They were learning to navigate their differences again, not with hostility but with a grudging respect. George, who had always felt overshadowed, found his voice again. His guitar solos were more confident, his contributions more assertive. John and Paul, for the first time in years, truly listened to him, acknowledging his unique genius. Ringo, the steady anchor, provided the rhythmic foundation, but also the emotional glue. His quiet presence, his gentle humor, often diffused moments of rising tension. One afternoon, while working on a particularly melancholic track, John found himself struggling with a lyric. He paced the studio, frustrated, muttering to himself. Paul, watching him, picked up his acoustic guitar and began to play a soft, familiar melody. It was Julia, a song John had written for his mother, a deeply personal, vulnerable piece from the White Album. John stopped pacing. He looked at Paul, who continued to play, his eyes gentle, understanding. It was an unspoken gesture of empathy, a reminder of the shared pain, the shared humanity that lay beneath all their arguments. John's eyes welled up. He hadn't heard Paul play that song since they recorded it. And in that moment, the years of bitterness, the accusations, the public feuds seemed to melt away. He walked over to Paul and, without a word, sat down beside him. Paul continued to play, and John, his voice thick with emotion, began to sing. "Half of what I say is meaningless, but I say it just to reach you, Julia." It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a raw, unadulterated expression of grief, of love, of longing. And as John sang, Paul joined in on harmony, their voices blending in a way that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. George and Ringo, watching from a distance, felt the weight of the moment, the harmony of forgiveness, the unspoken understanding that transcended words. When the song ended, John and Paul sat in silence for a long moment. Then John turned to Paul, his eyes still wet. "Thank you, Paul," he whispered. "Thank you." Paul simply nodded, his own emotions close to the surface. "Anytime, John, anytime." This was the climax. Not a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, deeply personal act of reconciliation. A moment where two men, who had once been brothers, then enemies, found their way back to a place of mutual respect and affection. It wasn't a full resolution of all their issues. The scars would always remain. But in that moment they chose forgiveness. They chose connection. They chose the music. And in doing so, they reaffirmed the unbreakable bond that had always existed between them, even through the darkest years. The studio, once a place of tension and discord, now felt imbued with a fragile, hopeful peace. The disaster of the reunion had been averted, not by grand gestures or public declarations, but by one improvised note, and the quiet, profound harmony of forgiveness. The Beatles as a performing unit might have been gone, but the spirit of their collaboration, the undeniable magic of their connection, had been rekindled. And John Lennon, looking at his bandmates, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. A peace born from the understanding that some bonds, like some melodies, are simply too strong to ever truly break. The days that followed that moment of shared vulnerability were filled with a quiet, renewed purpose. The remaining tracks for the compilation were completed with an ease and camaraderie that had been absent for years. The music flowed. The jokes returned. The old magic once thought lost forever had been rekindled, not in its original explosive form but as a warm, comforting glow. John and Paul, while not fully reconciled to the idea of a permanent reunion, had found a way to coexist, to create, to respect each other's artistic space. They even began to talk about future collaborations, not as the Beatles, but as John and Paul, separate entities, yet forever intertwined. George, no longer feeling stifled, contributed some of his most heartfelt guitar work, his melodies weaving seamlessly into the fabric of their sound. Ringo, ever the steady hand, provided the rhythmic backbone, his presence a comforting reminder of their shared history. The transformation was profound. The initial disaster of the reunion had given way to something unexpected, a healing, a quiet understanding, a recognition that while the band might be over, the bond between the four men was not. As the final mixing session drew to a close, the engineer played back the completed compilation. The sound that filled the studio was not just a collection of old tracks, it was a testament to their journey, the early, raw energy, the psychedelic experimentation, and the final, poignant tracks imbued with a newfound maturity and a fragile sense of peace. When Strawberry Fields Forever played, with Paul's improvised note now a deliberate, integral part of the arrangement, John closed his eyes. He heard not just the music but the echoes of their past, the laughter, the arguments, the shared dreams, and the profound, undeniable connection that had made them the Beatles. He opened his eyes and looked at Paul. Paul met his gaze, a knowing smile on his face. There was no need for grand declarations, no need for promises of a full reunion. The music had spoken for itself. The unspoken promise was clear. The door was not entirely closed. They might never again stand on a stage as the Beatles, but the possibility of creating music together in some form remained. The experience had changed John. He had come into the studio a man burdened by resentment, convinced that the magic was gone forever. He left with a lighter heart, a renewed sense of purpose, and a profound understanding of the enduring power of human connection. He realized that true freedom wasn't just about escaping the confines of a band. It was about finding peace within himself, about reconciling with his past, about forgiving and being forgiven. The world would continue to mourn the breakup of the Beatles, but for John, Paul, George, and Ringo, this disastrous reunion had become something else entirely. It had become a moment of quiet redemption, a testament to the fact that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal, and that sometimes the most profound transformations happen not in grand, public spectacles, but in the quiet intimacy of a recording studio between four men who had once conquered the world and were now simply trying to find their way back to each other. John walked out of the studio that day, not as a Beatle, but as John Lennon, an artist, a man, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of peace, a peace that resonated with the harmony they had rediscovered, a harmony that whispered of an unspoken promise, that the music, their bond, would always find a way to endure. The compilation album, released months later, was met with critical acclaim and commercial success, but for those who knew the true story behind its creation, it was more than just an album. It was a testament to a miracle, a testament to the enduring power of music to heal, to connect, to forgive. The world never got the full Beatles reunion it craved. The four men pursued their individual paths, creating groundbreaking solo work, exploring new artistic frontiers. But the bitterness, the public feuds, largely subsided. The quiet reconciliation in that London studio had laid the groundwork for a more respectful, if distant, relationship. John and Paul would occasionally collaborate, their names appearing on each other's albums, a subtle nod to the unbreakable bond they shared. George and Ringo remained close, their friendships a constant reminder of the early days. The story of that disastrous reunion, transformed by one improvised note, became a whispered legend among those closest to the band. A secret truth that revealed the true heart of the Beatles. It wasn't just about the songs. It was about the connection, the undeniable chemistry that transcended their personal differences, their egos, their fame. It was about the moment they remembered that they were more than just four individuals. They were a collective force, a harmony that, even when broken, could still find its way back to resonance. Years later, John Lennon, in one of his final interviews, reflected on that period. "People always ask me about the breakup," he said, his voice thoughtful. "And yeah, it was messy, it was painful. But what they don't understand is that we found something again in the end. Not a reunion, not really, but a peace. A way to remember why we started in the first place." He paused, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It was all about the music, you know, always. And sometimes all it takes is one note to remind you of that." His words, spoken with the wisdom of a man who had lived a life of extraordinary highs and lows, captured the essence of that London studio session. The Beatles' legacy is not just in their groundbreaking albums, their chart-topping hits, or their cultural impact. It is also in the unspoken stories, the hidden moments of vulnerability, the quiet acts of forgiveness, the profound understanding that even when the greatest of dreams shatter, the pieces can sometimes be reassembled, not into the original form, but into something new, something equally beautiful, something imbued with the wisdom of experience. The improvised note, Paul's unexpected chord, was more than just a musical flourish. It was a symbol of hope, a symbol of connection, a symbol of the enduring power of art to transcend conflict and remind us of our shared humanity. It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, when relationships seem irrevocably broken, when dreams lie shattered, there is always the possibility of a single, unexpected note. A note of understanding, a chord of forgiveness, a melody of reconciliation, that can change everything. And in the enduring echo of that one improvised note, the true, profound legacy of the Beatles lives on, not just as a band that changed music, but as a testament to the complex, messy, beautiful journey of human connection. A journey that, even after the final chord fades, continues to resonate, reminding us that some harmonies are simply too powerful to ever truly be silenced. If this incredible story of reconciliation and the enduring power of music moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about the importance of forgiveness and the magic of unexpected connections. What song has ever brought you back to a moment of peace or understanding? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the hidden depths of music's greatest legends.